Apreciados amigos y amigas, qué alegría que estemos todos juntos aquí en la Iglesia de Todos los Santos. Dear friends, what a joy it is that we are here together at All Saints Church together wherever we are. Mi nombre es Mike Kinman. My name is Mike Kinman. Soy Rector. I'm the Rector. My pronombre él. My pronouns are he, him. And welcome to Sunday Morning Live at All Saints Church on this Pentecost Sunday. Want to let you know a couple things that are going on here. Our Sunday morning food table at All Saints is going. We're handing out Ralph gift cards. We gave out 193 of them this morning, as well as 110 masks. And so if you want to participate in that and donate Ralph's gift cards, you can mail them to the church at 132 North Euclid, or if you are out already, you can drop them through the mail slot by the door facing the quad lawn. And thank you so much for that. We're also continuing to live in solidarity with Learning Works Charter School, which is an amazing community of teen scholars who are escaping from gang life, homeless, teen parents, pregnant teens, living in group homes, just amazing young people. And so when you go shopping, if you can pick up just some non-perishable food items, diapers, wipes, formula, and drop them off at Learning Works, which is 90 North Daisy Avenue, between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. Weekdays. Each week we pick a partner in love. And usually it's someone locally who's doing really great work here in the community that we want to support. Our partner in love this morning is the Minnesota Freedom Fund. Minnesota Freedom Fund works with the primary organizations of the Movement for Black Life in Minneapolis, and they're a primary source of bail money for the protesters on the ground in Minneapolis, standing up against police violence in the lynching of George Floyd. And so that link is going into the chat, and please give generously to the Minnesota Freedom Fund this morning. We hope that you are able to stay home and stay safe during this pandemic. And we also know that home is not always a safe place. And so if home is not a safe place for you, please let us know. And then we're putting some resources in the chat feature. The National Domestic Violence Hotline, numbers and text and website. And then also the Trevor Project, which is an amazing organization to support LGBTQ youth. And so if you are not safe, contact us and also use these resources. In a moment, we're going to introduce Amy Butler, Alicia Gordon, and I hope Delonte Gholston. Oh, Delonte's on, great. So, and so before I do, I just want to say a few things. And I'm just going to talk for just a little bit and just say a little bit about this week. And I'm feeling a lot right now. I am feeling exhaustion and sadness and anger and numbness. And I know that you are feeling some of these things, and I know that you are feeling a lot more. And I'm also, this morning, I'm feeling hope. I'm feeling hope because we are back here together again, even when we can't be together. And the one thing I know that we have shown each other as a community is this is where we go with our feelings. We bring them to Christ's table. We share them with one another. We feel it all. And then, we remember that no feeling is final. And so that's how we can feel them deeply. This week has been a lot of reminders, and it's been reminders that some of us did not need any reminders of. We are reminded that we didn't leave behind the toxic and deadly effect racism has on our society and our souls when this pandemic sent those of us who have homes back into them. And certainly those among us who find themselves daily in the crosshairs of this racism don't need any reminders of this. And George Floyd's lynching and the continued violence that is being meted out against the Black community, and just the evil encouragement of that violence from the President of the United States. On one level, this hasn't been surprising, but it has still been devastating. And we're seeing these images that are all too familiar. For me, they are flashbacks to 5 years ago in Ferguson. And yeah, that's hard. And then when I think back to that, I also remember the incredible courage and beauty of the young Black queer leaders who led that uprising. And I think about that, and it makes me absolutely convinced that this is not just a rerun, that we can and we must learn and build on those who have gone before. And that means that for those of us who are white, we've got to allow ourselves to feel what we're feeling, but not have this be about our feelings. Our feelings need to move us to actions of truly courageous justice and sacrificial love. as a community, we got to hold some space. We got to hold space for Black people to grieve and rage and wail and express all the emotions that are the natural consequence of centuries of dehumanization. And we got to stand with those who are in the streets right now. And we're going to do that tonight at 7 o'clock at Pasadena City Hall. And then we need to engage in conversations like we're going to engage in this morning that are going to lead to some really serious actions. Actions that are about how do we use our money? How do we use our assets? How do we use these things to cut away and transform the economic and political pillars that are supporting systemic racism in this country? And the other thing we got to do is we just got to keep praying. We got to keep coming together, and we got to keep praying. And so that's what I want us to do right now. So would you pray with me, please? God dwells in you. Holy God, you find us as we are. We are broken, and yet we are creatures of hope. And we cling to the promise of your love. We cling to the reality of your love. We ask that you help us not run from the fires that are burning right now, but to let them ignite fires in our hearts, fires of your Spirit, fires that will convict and convert and consecrate us to be your people in new ways in this world. We ask that you give us the gift of healing tears and the ability to hold each other in them, even when we cannot touch each other and be together. We ask you to give us the courage to be people, not just of justice, but of courageous justice. To know that you are with us and to guide us in the way of your truth all the days of our life. All this we ask in the name of the great healer, our brother Jesus. Amen. Okay, now I want to introduce our guest this morning. First, Amy Butler. Amy Butler's career has largely been helping historic institutions learn new ways to thrive and express a radically inclusive gospel. She has been the first woman in every senior leadership position she's taken, and most recently that led her to Riverside Church in New York City. And she is feeling deeply called to do what she can to help the church, and that's church with a capital C. That's all of us. Imagine a new way forward instead of just being shackled to the past, which is why she's going to share with us about her new initiative, which is called Invested Faith. And then we're also joined by Alicia Gordon. Alicia is an awarded faith leader, a preacher, educator, activist whose work intersects faith, culture, and politics. She is the former executive minister of programs at Riverside Church in New York, and currently she leads faith-based efforts with the E Pluribus Unum Fund and cultivating innovative projects for single mothers in East Harlem, and that's where she currently lives with her teenage daughter. So Alicia, it's good to have you here. And then it's great to welcome back a dear friend of All Saints, Delonte Gholston. Delonte, it's so good to see you, brother. Delonte is the senior pastor at Peace Fellowship Church in Washington, D.C. We know him here at All Saints from his time in Pasadena at Fuller Seminary. Delonte is committed to using his passion for art, theology, and social change to bring life and flourishing to both cities and rural areas. Here in LA, that fueled his work with the Downtown LA Clergy Council, where he served as director of the Trust Talks, a community transformation initiative between the LAPD and stakeholders in downtown. And since he moved to DC, he started organizing something called Peace Walks. And these are walks in his neighborhood to build community and raise awareness and commitment to address the underlying causes of urban violence. And so Delonte, you welcome back. It is so good to see your face, brother, and welcome back to All Saints Church. I want to start with you, Amy. And then I wanted to sort of, actually, we'd start with whoever. We don't need to start with Amy. Just invite any one of you to sort of speak up and just sort of say, what's on your heart right now? I said a little bit about what I'm feeling. Talk about what you're feeling right now. And I think what you name is probably going to resonate with other folks. So who wants to start off?
I'll start. Thank you so much for having me and having us and having this conversation. I'm sitting with the complexities of this notion of double consciousness. Double consciousness is a term coined by Dr. W.B. Du Bois in his book, The Souls of Black Folk. And he talks about this way of being, and sometimes I call it an art form, that Black folks in America have had to learn to live in a state of double consciousness, very aware of our Black selves, in the communities in which we can use our own vernacular and our own way of seeing and speaking in the world in safe spaces, and then also having to go into a white world and put on essentially what is a mask, right? A lot of us call that respectability politics. A lot of us call it a number of things. And this notion of double consciousness kind of came to me, reminded me this week as protests happen all over the country, and thinking about the complexities and the challenges and the wrestling of what does it mean to be fighting something as pervasive as COVID-19, something that we know has disproportionately impacted Black and Brown communities, being in that space of danger, right? And still having to put our lives at further risk to fight the wiles of white supremacy. It's, you know, and I was like, wow, this double consciousness of having to say, do I sacrifice my well-being, even though my well-being is already challenged, right? Because of all the systematic ways that make being Black in America challenging, and the challenges that come with being adversely impacted by a pandemic, and still having to be on the front lines, still putting ourselves and our bodies and our health and our well-being on the front lines to fight something like white supremacy and racism and police brutality. And it's the duality of that, of having to risk even further, right? We talk a lot about risk-taking in these spaces and church spaces. But damn, what does it mean to be already at risk and still asked to risk even more? Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of where I have been like circling around the bend this week of Du Bois's notion of double consciousness, to constantly be living in these two worlds anyway, and the risk that takes, and the art of doing that well in a place like this, really for the sake of self-preservation and preservation of people in our community, and still, even then, it not being enough, and still having to put our lives on the front line and our health on the front line. It's something I've been kind of like toying around, like, what does that mean? What trauma, further traumatization is happening as a result of us having to fight something like white supremacy and police brutality in the midst of a pandemic? So that's where I am.
Wow, thank you.
I'll go next. What a hard week. What a terrible week. What a terrible 4 years. I mean, what a terrible. There's, because of COVID and the news this week and the pushing again to the front of our consciousness, police brutality and racism and white supremacy infusing all the systems in which we live. Those of us who have the luxury of being complacent are now beginning to feel the urgency of life and death. We're stuck in our homes, we're scared of getting sick. Well, maybe now we can start to understand what our Black and Brown brothers and sisters are going through. I think a lot in my work about the future of the institutional church, and that urgency is translating into my thoughts these days. Like, I'm really asking, this is the moment more than ever before that the church needs to show up. And if we're not going to show up, and if we're not going to tell the truth, then should we have a future? Those are the questions that are on my mind. I heard from a friend this morning who told me her husband's a pastor and he will not be mentioning the news events of this week. That's malpractice. Mm-hmm. And it's wrong. Mm-hmm. And it's not the gospel. So I don't know if that makes any coherent sense, but that's just the best words I have for how I'm feeling right now.
Delonte, what's on your heart?
I think I've been trying to find, I think like everybody, I've been trying to find meaning. I've been trying to find something to say. You know, people call you because you've been saying something or doing something, and you know, there's a sense of you should have something to say.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I think the hardest thing for me is I right now, I'm at a loss. I'm at a loss. I'm at a loss on what to say. I'm at a loss on what to do. I have a 2-year-old toddler. My wife is we're expecting in August. To have a partner at home who is immunocompromised, I've been struggling with a lot of guilt that I haven't been out. I want to be out, and I can't right now. I checked off social media back at the end of March because I was feeling like there was something about this pandemic that was causing this circus of sort of competition around relevance. And this sort of circus of competition around online, relevance, I guess, is the only way I can give language to it. And the Spirit just told me to back away from it, back away from trying to carve your new niche and this new pandemic opportunity. There's something about it, something about the way we live in these companies that are controlled by all kinds of well-meaning progressive white dollars at Twitter and Facebook that caused me to turn my attention toward our community here in DC in Ward 7 and Ward 8, where it used to be Chocolate City. A lot of people know that DC is known as Chocolate City, but it's more like a, I don't know, it's like a cappuccino with some froth on the top right now. I mean, there's something down in there, but it's hard to see right now. And where I live and where our church is located is like the last sort of community, the last bastion of Blackness in what used to be a Black city. And so I just decided to focus. We decided as a church, and our elders and lay leaders, we decided to focus as much of our resources, as much of our attention as possible on figuring out, touchless ways to remain in contact. For the sake of all the people that have had diagnosis in our church. We've lost loved ones in our church. I lost a ministry colleague last week. We had to bury him, who passes the church right across the street from me. So I'm just when this all hit, I ran out of things to say. I ran out of things to say because if you haven't been listening up to this point, I can't help you. I don't know what to tell you. If you don't know, if you don't understand, racism, militarism, and capitalism by now, if you don't understand the ways in which our people have had an empire on their neck for as long as we have been in this country, if you can't see that right now, then I don't have anything to tell you. I love you. You're my brother, my sister, my sibling in Christ, I think. But if the Jesus that you're worshiping is not in flesh, is not in a body that was marginalized, that was crucified by a state that had its empire on his neck, on his family's neck, where he had to run to solace in Africa for 12 years. We didn't hear from the brother because he was getting some self-care, some family care out of the view of the empire for just a little bit. And so if that's not the kind of Jesus that all I can do is pray. Right now, I don't have words that, talking point type words, talking head type words. All I can do is pray that the fire that we see comes to purify us, cleanse us of our clear sin and iniquity and ugliness, all I can do is pray that that fire baptizes us. Maybe we've only been baptized by the water, you know, and we just know we're part of the household of faith. We're a part of the club, you know. Nice sermon, Pastor. You know, oh, so good to see you. I gave you a donation to the good cause you told me to pay some money toward. Okay, but have you been baptized by fire? If you haven't been baptized yet by a fire that we see in Acts 2, Acts 4, where you die if you hold back. By the time we get to Acts chapter 5, if you come up here talking about you part of the church and you're giving in radical ways, wink, wink, nod, nod, actually I'm holding back my privilege. Wink, wink, nod, nod, actually I'm holding back my vulnerability. Wink, wink, nod, nod, actually I'm holding back my true self, my true feelings, my true hurt, my true power. I don't know what kind of God you serve, but I still believe in a God that's a God of consequences for a church that holds back. I still have a very clear theology on heaven and hell. I know I'm in a more progressive space, but I still believe in justice. You know, I believe in full consequences for ugliness and for sin. So that's where I am. I love you, you know, with the love of the Lord. But if you can't see this fire comes to purify us all and cleanse us all of our unrighteousness, then let it burn. Just let it burn.
Yeah.
Amen.
Amen. So I'm reminded, friend of ours that you know, Delonte, Andre Henry, and you know Andre has introduced us to the work of Gene Sharp, and Gene Sharp, and this is something that Andre preached for us a couple different times. And this is what Gene Sharp says. He says, by themselves, rulers cannot collect taxes, enforce repressive laws and regulations, keep trains running on time, prepare national budgets, direct traffic, manage ports, print money, repair roads, train the police and army, issue postage stamps, or even milk a cow. People provide these services to the ruler through a variety of organizations and institutions. And if people stop providing these skills and services, the ruler cannot rule. The people are the main holders of power in society, but they are much more effective at exercising that power when they work together in the form of organizations or institutions, such as the police, civil servants, labor groups, business groups, and I would add churches. Now, some of these organizations may support your opponent, others may support your movement. We call these supporting organizations pillars of support because they support the power structure in society. And at the beginning of a nonviolent struggle, it's likely that many of these organizations provide support to your opponent. If these organizations and institutions begin to withdraw their support from your opponent, and some may even actively start supporting your movement, your opponent will no longer be able to maintain control. And so what you've described is a church that has become a pillar for supporting structures of oppression. And so this is where I want to kick back to you, Amy, and talk a little about your idea about invested faith. Which is, you know, how do we, first of all, take that pillar and have it stop be supporting what it is supporting right now? And then how do we withdraw our support from the other pillars and invest support in pillars that are going to transform and change? So tell us a little bit about what you got going on.
Thanks, Mike. Well, when I left Riverside, I had some time to think, and I think I'm passionate a lot about the institutional church and its role in American society. We have been in a sweet spot for far too long and way too comfortable. And we've woken up and we're finding ourselves in bed with capitalism. And we don't know what to do now that our institutions are beginning to decline. And that's happening all over the United States. It's not in one denomination. It's not in one place. It's just happening. The church as we know it, the go in and sit in the pews, everybody has to go to church to be accepted in society. That's not here anymore. And a lot of my younger colleagues especially, they'll go to seminary because they feel called to change the world. They'll be put in a pulpit in the middle of the country in a dying institution, and they will leave the church because they are finding that they are not doing the work of the gospel through the institution. Now, there are a lot of people out there who are repurposing church buildings, thinking in new ways about how the church can be part of the community, but there are a lot of churches that are going to die and should die. And COVID has now pushed us to a more extreme place. Churches that had several years of runway now have about 2-3 months, right? And American institutional Christianity holds so much capital, so many assets, over trillions of dollars, more than Google and Apple and Microsoft combined. The church, buildings and institutions and land and all of these things we have been collecting because of our privilege all of these years, and they are slipping away from us. Meanwhile, there are people creating church outside the walls of church. A friend of mine left the church because he noticed that older men in his community were committing suicide at a very high rate. They didn't have any place to gather. Starts a brewery that's built around a model of intentional conversation, and he's building community. There are people doing church in all kinds of ways, doing the work of loving God, loving neighbor, and helping each other thrive, that are outside the walls. So I started thinking about how could we capture some of the assets of these institutions and redirect them to social innovators who are changing their communities. So I'm working on building a fund, and it is built on the theological premise that the economy of God is an economy of abundance. And so when we sit in our church buildings and obsess over enough money to fix the roof, we are living out an economy of scarcity, not abundance. We have to, we're gospel people, we have to be thinking in a manner of abundance. And you can see this playing out with this whole, like, I'm not gonna wear a mask, I'm not gonna, we have lost our sense of interdependence. My thriving depends on your thriving, and until the people of God begin acting as if they believe there's enough for all of us to thrive, we're going to be part of the systems and the structures that continue racism and continue white supremacy and sexism and all of the things that hold each other down because I have to hold you back so that I feel like I'm safe. That's not the economy of God, and we have to change it.
So first of all, amen. Alisha, I want to kick it over to you, because you two work together at Riverside, and you've actually left. I don't know if you're not working for a church right now, right?
No.
You're doing gospel work somewhere else. So can you sort of talk about that decision for you? And you left a church that has like $150 million in endowment, and are working now doing something else. Talk about what Amy's doing and where you see that this could really just sort of play out in places like the work you're doing right now.
Yeah, thanks. I think my vocational journey in the last year or so has being at Riverside and with Amy there under her leadership really was the place where I started to really understand this notion of social innovation, right? Where we began to really rethink, well, how does the church utilizes resources to answer the world's social problems. There has been a long-standing belief that I've always had, and I think both Amy and Delonte probably agree, is that the answers to the social ills of our time have always lived in the hearts and the hands of marginalized people. Mm-hmm. Right? We know the answer. We know how to fix it. We know how to clothe people. We know how to do it, mostly in part because of our own lived experiences, right? And so when I left Riverside, I took opportunity to really discern my own lived experience as a Black woman from the South who's a single mother of a teenage daughter who's been parenting on her own all this time, who has multiple advanced degrees, who's traveled, mm-hmm. all of these things that are really an anomaly to the Black single mother experience, right? And so what I learned at Riverside, what I learned when I was on the Bloomberg campaign, which was a whole thing within itself, something I just kind of threw myself into to really have a better understanding about policy and politics, and how the things that we often say in these liberal spaces, that the people who are creating the policies that frame not just our social understanding, but even our ecclesial understanding, how we do our work, are written by people who have not had the lived experience, right? And so how do we take what Amy is talking about, this merging of money and meaning, and put those resources in the hands of the people who have had the lived experiences that can really do the work for themselves? And I find that even in my work, you know, I'm doing the work with EPU, which is Mitch Landrill's, and thinking about helping faith communities really dig in deep in these, around census, and how there are these hard to reach communities, right? And equipping churches and equipping faith communities with the resources they need to make the extended bridge to ensure that those communities are counted. And not just on a high level, let's make sure we're counted 10 for 10, that whole thing, but really being able to connect the outcomes of doing something like the census to the policy impact. So to say in Jackson, Mississippi, if we can get 100% response rate on the census, that equates to 2 new schools, or that increases per student capita. These are just numbers I'm throwing out there. Per student capita from $100 a student to $1,000 a student. Like, what are the real tangible ways that doing this kind of civic engagement through the channel of the faith community has a long-term impact? And the other side of my work that I really think, while I'm always enamored with this thinking that Amy is talking about, is, you know, doing work with single moms in East Harlem, and thinking about, you know, my trajectory as a Black single mom from Atlanta has really been shaped by what we call the beloved community, right? I'm only been able to say these things and do these things and be in these spaces because there were people who were willing to hold up the burden of high rent, hold up the burden of childcare, hold up the burden of all the things that often crush, oppress people, in this case, Black single mothers, from being able to really achieve their goals and dreams, right? And so this work that I'm doing now is helping me think about and really get into this notion of what does it look like to impact social inequality, economic inequality for this large segment of most urban churches, right? You think about the average urban church across America, majority of the congregants are women. And I would assure you that many of those women are single moms or mothers who have been divorced or widowed or whatever, who are now caring for children. So how do we create conditions that are conducive to thriving? And that really is about, and the question that I've always asked was, well, how does the church do that work, right? Because scripture calls for us to take care of the widow, to take care of the fathers, to take care of those things, those communities. And how do we really utilize the resources of the church? If there's an institution that owns a brownstone or owns an apartment building, how are we intentional about putting families into those communities, alleviating the burden of rent for 12 months or 24 months so that mother can go back to school? Right? Because there are strong ties to when a woman has better access to education, she can get better jobs, which pulls her out of this cycle of poverty, right? And the question is, how does the church really fuels that type of work to not just on some like day-to-day handout, but really equipping people with these lived experiences, with the resources they need, and do really innovative, transformative work? Because what I'm talking about, no institution is really thinking about in the long term, but I think what Amy is proposing is that the institutional church has the resources to do something like that. And so how do we get those resources in the hands of a Delonte Gholston or an Alicia Gordon to really think intently about not just change happening in the higher sphere, but also thinking about how do we equip people to do long-term sustainable work that changes the entire trajectory of communities.
Yeah, well, and so Delonte, I'm thinking about the neighborhood that you're describing, that you're in right now when Alisha talks, which is, you know, a neighborhood that has been gentrified, and what the church has traditionally done is followed the money, and so gone with that. And then communities like yours end up being the people who are left behind. What if, the church really grasped our gospel call to say, no, that's actually where we need to stay, and we need to invest in communities, and not just invest in some ethereal way, but real dollars, real resources, and give up control of that put it in the hands of the people who are on the ground, not sort of stay in our place and say, here, we're going to give you a little bit, see what you can do with this. But, so what do you see happening on the ground where you are?
Yeah, I just got out after our services ended. I went outside to sit down and just reflect, and kind of just meditate a little bit and pray and ask the Lord, Lord, you want me to say something again? I don't know what I'm gonna have to say for these folk. And I was taking the trash outside, and two of my neighbors, both about my age, I guess the mid 30s, African American men, and both, one works for Metro, he cleans the subways and cleans the buses, and the other he works in retail, and he's the guy that cuts the grass in the neighborhood, and they also provide medicinal public health for the community as well. And so I overheard them talking about what I've been thinking about, and they was basically like talking about how what's on everybody, what's on every Black person's heart right now is what's going to happen when the case is tried and Chauvin comes back with I don't know, a year and some change or something stupid, something predictable like that. And you asked me this question, what's happening on the ground, and a lot of our work is about addressing what I pick up on is this sense of expected hopelessness, routinized, a sort of a lived hopelessness that's it's just our reality. It's not like we're trying to be pessimistic. It's not like we're trying to be nihilistic or something like that. It's just our lived experience that we know what this system produces. We know what it is to be Black in this country. We know that to put our faith in these institutions, regardless of what they're called. Whether it's the bank, whether it's the police, whether it's the Department of Health, or the church. We know these institutions ain't never been here to really serve us, so we don't put our faith in them. We don't expect that there's going to be any different outcome. In fact, if there is a different outcome, it's a shock. It comes as a shock. It comes as a shock or a surprise to us, which is why people still don't understand why people around the country were dancing in the streets when OJ was let go. Yes, I did say OJ. When he was not charged, or when situations changed for him back in the 90s, people don't understand that when a brother does actually catch a break, when the system does actually work in our favor, it comes as a shock to us. It comes as a shock to us. Now OJ belongs behind bars, and the brother, in my opinion, the brother, But my point is that it always comes as a shock to us when things actually go our way. So, a lot of I don't know what we're doing. All we're doing is we're just trying not to lead nothing. We're trying to partner. If there's a need and the community identifies a need, our approach is how can we come along? How can we, be partners with what you're told? The mutual aid, we helped to start the DC Mutual Aid Network, which is just Jesus' command: love God, love your neighbor as yourself. The prophets and everything is wrapped up in this, in these two commands, right? And so when we saw there were, it was a couple sisters that were like, okay, how do we get groceries to our neighbors who are in need? We were like, well, let us partner. We're not out front running anything. The community is running it, but we just try to fundraise on our part, send members to help get deliveries to our loved ones, households, certain members, obviously go to Giant on their own, go to Safeway on their own. We just try to make sure that the need is met without trying to take credit, without trying to say, and by the way, our worship services at 10 o'clock. You know what I mean? So I think what I hear in this moment, that's what we're doing. And I think what I hear in this moment as I'm listening to my sisters, talk is I'm hearing what James Cone said Tavis Smiley had he used to have these forums, these black community forums back like in the 90s when I was a kid, and he had one, and James Cone was actually on one of these. It was like in 96 or something like that. And I went back and watched it recently. I go back and watch this clip, by the way, periodically just to get some fresh oil from Dr. Cone now that he's God rest his soul, now that he's no longer with us in the flesh. And he said that the church has become obsessed with its own survival.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep.
Yes.
Dr. Cone said, but the crop, he said, but good night, baby. night, sweet pea. But he said, that's my daughter, Evan. It's not. But he said that the church has forgotten that it is a church not just of resurrection and return, but it is also a church of the cross. Mm-hmm. It is still that the church has always been and should always continue to be a church of the cross. And he said that a church of the cross remembers when Jesus said in Matthew 16:25 that anyone who seeks to save his life will lose it. Mm-hmm. But anyone who desires to lose their life for my sake, hallelujah, will gain it. And I'm just, I don't need to say nothing else. Cone said it all. And Jesus said it all in Matthew 6:25. You know, so there's no new words, y'all. Ecclesiastes, there's nothing new under the sun. We know what we have to do. It's just up to us to do it. So I applaud my sisters for taking the lead on that.
Yeah, so it's a mission to liberation. Amy, I know you want to jump in.
I love what you're saying, Delonte. And I moved to DC this week, so we gotta cause some trouble together. Some of you may know Diamond Hargis. He lives in Indianapolis, and he goes to a big white Methodist church, and he is Black. And he looked around his neighborhood 5 blocks and thought, you know, if we start investing in each other in this way of in this model of mutual aid, we could change this entire neighborhood. Mm-hmm. Went to the white church, said, give me $5,000, invest in a woman who wants to open a bakery. She opens a bakery and is successful. So she in turn invests in someone who's opening a barbershop. And in 5 years, like over $5 million been invested in this little part of Indianapolis. And it's neighbors caring for neighbors, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, so I'm invested in the success of your bakery. I want it to succeed. And I just think that we need to do that as the church writ large in this country. You know, you got a good idea to solve this social issue? We have money. We're investing in you, mm-hmm. you know? Because I understand that I will never fully thrive unless you're thriving.
So Alicia, you wrote something here that only went out to the panelists. You said we cannot truly do the gospel work codependent on capitalistic systems. For example, banks. Vehicles like invested faith really allows for the work to happen with the people leading the work. The image that keeps coming into my head scripturally is the Exodus. Because, you know, the church has become Pharaoh's Egypt. And, you know, we have become Pharaoh's Egypt because we are using the labor of the people to sustain ourselves and not to feed the people. And so what happened in the liberation of the people of Israel was there's just like these 2 lines in Exodus where God tells the people, go take their jewels, despoil the Egyptians, take the wealth of the oppressor so that it can sustain you in the wilderness. Now, of course, they ended up making a golden calf out of some of it. So you got to be careful what happens there, you know, and because that happens too. But it is about, so how can we be about basically despoiling the Egyptians? How can we take the resources of institution that have become so enmeshed with this capitalistic system that oppresses people and does not feed them, and use it to fund a revolution and use it to take, because we're on a wilderness, what you're talking about is a wilderness journey. But a wilderness journey is a journey of liberation, you know, and like, that's what you're talking about. Yeah, go.
I want to take it even a step further.
Great.
I met some some people in England who started an effort called Seedbed 25 years ago, where, and it was started by a very wealthy philanthropist who said, my money has control of my life. Even when I give it away with expectations of what it's going to do, and you have to report to me and all of these things. So he said, here's £5 million, go give it away. And so a group of men, 5 of them, went out and, sat down with Alicia Gordon and heard about what she wanted to create in East Harlem, and had coffee and said, I like what you're doing. Here's £5,000. Knock yourself out. I don't need to hear back from you. And I was talking to these guys to find out how the model worked. And 25 years later, every major social innovation in Great Britain can tie its way back to Seedbed. Like, you and me, we're wealthy. We need our wealth not to control us. And we need it to do good in the world, How about we be like Jesus and throw seed all over the place and see what happens?
Amen.
Can I jump in there?
Joe, please do.
Yes, so good. I want to make sure that I answer your question and add to what Amy is saying, is that this is about decentralizing power, right? The church, decentralizing power and decentralizing the church, right? The institutional church has centralized all its power into these institutions, into these pastoral personalities, into these, all of these things, right? And I remember reading this book called The Starfish and the Spider. If you've never read that, it's a fascinating book. It has absolutely nothing to do with religion, but it talks about those organizations that have created webs, kind of what Amy is talking about, these webs of network where you just plant seeds and you just it just grows organically. And I remember reading that and thinking about Jesus's model to bring heaven to earth, to change the system, was that he was always seeking to decentralize power, to say, yes, I have come, I am the savior, but I leave you with the power, right, to do the work, because I'm going on to heaven, I'm sitting at the right hand of the throne, I'm good, I'm done, but there's still work to do, right? Yep. And so I think this notion of social innovation, this notion of the church doing this work, is that the church is going to have to get over ego, right? And to be willing to decentralize the power, to really equip people. We talk about discipleship all the time. But what I'm finding, even especially in COVID, even in my own church spaces, the churches that I go to in Harlem, and that our congregants were having such a hard time not being in the physical church building. They wanted, and this is not about just, having commonality and community with one another, but we were finding that people didn't know how to worship. People didn't know how to engage. People didn't know how to really dig into the gospel for themselves, because the center of power had always been the pulpit, right? Instead of equipping people to say, the pulpit is here. It's in this house. It's in this shelter. It's here, right? And so how do we even go a step further to say that the institutional church is willing to decentralize its power, to sow financial seeds into people and communities that have the spirit of innovation in them, that are looking to solve our everyday problems, and the only thing they are missing is money, right? And that is where our power, our institution, our collective power lies, is to say that we are willing to do as Jesus did, which is to say that we are willing to decentralize our power, decentralize our church, and really lean into this notion of resourcing people to do the work that God has called us to do. That's what gets me excited about this whole thing. Amen. So exciting.
We've got some people who are starting to ask some questions. We got about 11 minutes left, so I want to sort of get to some of these questions and just throw them out there for us. John asks, thank you for this conversation. What do you see that will invert the economics so that the contributors, the people actually produce products and services and are the real source of value that's propagated in larger society, are in fact the recipients of recognition and contributed to? How do we get away from arbitrage, making money on money, to a market that exchanges products and services, contributes, and is contributed to? Basically, how do we have an economic revolution? And how can the church be a part of that? Anybody?
Well, we've got some serious work to do on laws and policies in this country, and how they support the wealthy, and do not support that network of support that Alicia's talking about. One of the reasons why I am so interested in pushing capital to these social entrepreneurs is it is so hard to be a social entrepreneur. You know, 80% fail their first time around, you know, and you have to have people who believe in what you're trying to build and will support you and direct their resources toward you. And that's extraordinarily difficult to find. You know, if you're doing some big tech startup and you can go on Shark Tank or whatever, you know, that is not the people who are baking brownies with people who are coming out of prison, you know? The church should be right there, and that will begin an economic revolution, certainly in the way that we, followers of Jesus, think about what we have.
Excellent. Grace asks, the urban church has learned to be as capitalistic as the historical church, mainline, etc. This is the wealth gospel. How do we challenge the full church where those of us in the colored communities don't fall into the same trap of greed for me and mine?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking earlier as we were talking, when you were talking, Mike, about taking Pharaoh's jewels to then worship the golden calf.
Yeah.
And that is the work that is the hardest work, right? Because folk who think of themselves as white can give their power away. And then if we're going to be totally honest, folks of us who have been thought to be black have internalized and ingested just as much of the capitalism, just as much of the patriarchy, just as much of the misogyny, just as much of the trans and homophobia as the system that has oppressed us. So, how do we prevent this pyramid of an empire that has its knee on our neck while we have our knee on somebody else's neck? While the person whose knee we have our neck on has their knee on somebody else's neck, right? And so, and I think the most important word that Alicia mentioned when she was speaking that resonates the most with me is discipleship. Christian discipleship is about sanctification, and this theological word that means everything. What is the purpose of the fire on Pentecost? We were already baptized. We were already baptized with water, right? So why would fire come, right? Fire comes, at least Malachi. It's for the for the Word of Faith folks. Malachi 3 is everybody's favorite verse. Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse. There might be meat in my house. Test me in this, saith the Lord, and I will open up a window. Or this is my Bible. I have what it says. Everybody knows how to do that type of pledge, right? But what Malachi 3 is really speaking to, what Malachi really is really asking is do we know the God of justice, right? Do we know the God of justice who calls for a refiner's fire? Malachi 3 actually says, who can stand? Who can stand on the day of the Lord's coming? For it is a refiner's fire, a purifier. So what does it mean for us to be cleansed, to be purified, to do the collective and collaborative work as marginalized people of detoxing ourselves of the patriarchy, detoxing ourselves of the greed, detoxing ourselves of the capitalism? That means that what that really means, loved ones, is that means that we not only have to hold our white privileged allies accountable, but it also means that we have to hold each other accountable in love. And that is what it means to be sanctified. It means that any truth, this is why Jesus said the minute that you start judging somebody else, you forget that you have something in your eye, right? Oh, watch that in your eye now. Watch that in your eye. So that's what the process looks like. The process looks like a community that knows each other well enough, that we know each other's junk. We know each other's stuff. Discipleship has to take place in smaller groups, right? It means that pastors and church leaders, people who have gone to seminary or whatever, we have to be a part of communities of peers, right? Where we get to check each other on on each other's stuff. okay? That means that anybody that receives funding from a church also needs to be a part of a cohort, a community, a tribe, if you will, where I think I saw this in the comments. Yeah, somebody actually lifted this up in the comments, and the AA model. So this model of true transparency, true humility, where you can jump out there and say, actually, this week, you know, I'm so grateful that we got this grant, but I've been tempted to do a spinoff. I've been tempted to not actually give just wages to, you know, I've been tempted to, I don't know, to go on vacation to the Bahamas where I put my neck on somebody else's, my knee on somebody else's neck, right? As opposed to figuring out what it looks like to take Sabbath in the city and ways to support folks around me in the city. You know, so I'm just saying, I'm just throwing out here that this concept that really Alicia spoke to of discipleship, of refining, of sanctification, of cleansing, but that has to happen in community, and it can't happen in these huge sessions. It needs to happen. It needs to be built into whatever model that. Let me finish with this. Whatever model that is given, it needs to have sort of Ecclesiastes talks about it like this in Ecclesiastes chapter 4. It says that a 3-strand cord is not easily broken. All right. So when I talk about discipleship, I talk about it in 3 ways. That means that there needs to be mentorship that's happening from the top and the bottom. That means somebody who's farther along with you, which is why I call on, you know, Reverend James Loss. You know, I want a 91-year-old, you know what I'm saying, who's really been through it to speak truth into me, right? But then there needs to be discipleship, and my 3 pastors here in DC. But then there needs to be peer discipleship. You know, that's why I'm in a cohort with other pastors where I get to, you know, hopefully be as honest as I possibly can and let them be as honest as they possibly can with me, right? But so that's the 2nd strand. But then the 3rd strand needs to be reaching back sort of discipleship, a pipeline, if you will, where we get to be honest with our mentees. Our mentees get to see us broken, cry, hurt, having marital counseling, going to therapy. You know what I'm saying? So those are the things that's how I would see it. It's discipleship in 3 ways. That's
wonderful. We've got like 2-3 minutes, and there's one more question here I want to get to, because it really sort of says, okay, so how do we start? And it says, I'm intrigued by Amy's comments on the institutional church's capital, land in particular, with the future of evangelical Christian universities across the country being so uncertain. And I would say just the future of the church being so uncertain as an institution. Where can we begin this action in this microcosm or others to reimagine the capital of the church? So where do we start?
Where do we start? You know, it's only relationships that change us. That's it, you know? And I'm not going to be successful going around the country saying, just give me your money, I'm going to put it in a bank account and give it away. What has to happen is what Delonte's talking about. It's a change of heart, and it's a change of perspective. You know, we have to stop thinking like scarcity rules our lives and begin understanding that God's abundance is here for everybody. When I was at Riverside, we built a world-class development department. Christian Peel is a genius. And she would always say, like, we're talking about the spiritual discipline of generosity. We're not talking about we need to keep the lights on and you need to give me money, or you got to tithe or you're going to hell. You know, This is about holding loosely all the abundance that God has given us and investing it in what's coming next. So to do that practically, what we're doing is producing short video segments about social entrepreneurs who are doing like this amazing work. The doctor in Flint, Michigan, who opens a practice and a farmer's market and gives all the kids $15 prescriptions for fruit and vegetables, changing the entire nutritional makeup of children in Flint, Michigan. You know, like, church people never have really considered that this might be the work of the church, right? And once you start telling these compelling stories, people are like, yes, yes. And then when you underwrite it with a theology of abundance, then I know that what I have cannot control me.
Mm-hmm.
And I live with gratitude for all that God has given me. So shifting the theological and telling the stories of people who are doing it differently.
Well, I want to thank all of you. And Amy, this started with Gary Hall doing a little matchmaking between the two of us. And we originally were going to plan to have you out here in Pasadena this month preaching, and then really looking at sort of how could you use All Saints maybe as one of your home bases for this. And that conversation is absolutely going to continue. So we're going to keep having you back and look at how we can walk this together. And Delonte, you're going to be back with us in a couple of weeks on our Juneteenth panel. And it's always great to see you, and please give, love to your family. It was great to hear your daughter's voice, and congratulations on the new one coming. That's just beautiful. And I hope to get out there sometime. I hope we can see each other soon. And Alicia, just thank you so much. It has been wonderful to meet you, and we need to find a way to stay connected with you too. Because this has just been phenomenal. So
Mike,
thank you.
Invitation.
Yes,
You bet. And so let's keep working. Let's keep doing this. And just God love all of you, holding you in our hearts.
Just bless me, y'all. Peace. I appreciate it.
Peace. Thank you so much.